Hello, everyone, and welcome back to an all new episode of the Financial Confessions. And we are once again blessed and obsessed on this channel because I am speaking to yet another one of my favorite YouTubers. Like, we have been eating these past several weeks on the channel. And I'm really, really excited to talk to yet another woman who I think is really shaping and thinking about how we analyze media and culture and politics in the world we live in such an interesting and accessible way. I've been binging her videos for a very long time, and some of you may be familiar with her. I'm sure we'll have many of the stands in the comments. But she is someone that I wanted to speak to, not only because I love what she has to say, particularly about the media that we consume. We did a few videos in the run-up to the Oscars. And of course, pop culture is something we do like to think about quite a bit on this channel, but especially when it comes time for things like the faux meritocracy of award season, I think it's all the more important to be extremely critical of not only how we think of the culture, but how we think of success, how we think of who deserves the accolades we're given, who's even in the room to be considered, and what this cultural display of meritocracy implies for our day-to-day perceptions of who's deserving in the world around us. We don't necessarily give out Oscars at our workplace, but when we think about the kinds of rewards and validations that we're often given, a lot of the same problems tend to manifest. Now, my guest today, her work often does tend to focus more on the cinematographic or the media analysis sort of angle of all of these questions, but I think it's just as important, and she often covers it as well, to think of it through a class and socioeconomic lens. So in celebration of award season, of us all thinking about when Angela Bassett did The Thing, and just generally enjoying this time of media and meritocracy and the lie that is both, I want to welcome my guest today, Maia of Broey Deschanel.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be on the show. I'm a huge fan.
Thanks to Advisor.com for supporting TFC. Advisor.com offers financial planning and investing for a flat annual fee. Schedule a free consultation call with Advisor.com today at Advisor.com and never make another financial decision alone. So as I mentioned in the intro, so we are, depending on when this airs, we're sort of like in the zeitgeist of award season, which I think is a really interesting kind of time, as I mentioned, for not just kind of thinking about the media that we consume, but also thinking about what we're rewarding, what is even considered for accolades. So I'd love to kind of start, especially for people who may not know, to just kind of hear about what it is that you really cover on your channel and how you view movies in particular, because that is, primarily what you cover, but then also how you specifically think about these things in the context of award season and awards in general.
Yes, my videos, I try to kind of take a more cultural studies angle to my videos. I think that there is already quite a lot of people on YouTube who were making more like film school angled approaches to their videos, but like I didn't go to film school, so I don't really have that expertise. I did take cultural studies. So mainly what I try to do with my videos is situate them within pop culture and kind of navigate where they stand. So usually I'll kind of start with finding like a common discourse about a piece of media and then like building it out from there, and trying to kind of figure out, if the discourse has been a good thing for our culture, whether or not I agree with it. Sometimes I do. And I usually try to kind of poke holes in overwhelmingly popular arguments that I don't agree with, or like try to focus more on the gray areas and maybe opinions that aren't necessarily getting out there as much about these pieces of media. In regards to award season, yeah, I think that award season has really revealed over the past few years kind of this fake meritocracy in the film industry, and I think we're all becoming incredibly aware of it. I think that we're realizing how insular Hollywood is and the ways that these ceremonies have been kind of rigged since the beginning. It's just becoming more and more obvious as the years go on. You can see that like what their markers are for a great film. You can see that their markers for great filmmaking are incredibly narrow and tend to leave out like really interesting, innovative pieces of work. And so it feels like they're kind of stagnating and falling behind with the times. But at the same time, I do feel like these award ceremonies also give kind of give awareness to and like visibility to films that people aren't necessarily talking about because they aren't kind of like popular filmmaking. And so for that, like over the past couple of years especially, I've kind of been appreciating the fact that they give attention to kind of, you know, like more artful filmmaking or less like high, you know, high octane type filmmaking that we're seeing kind of play out in cineplexes. And I think that that's been kind of a good thing. So I think it's a kind of a double-edged sword. I like do not like award ceremonies at this point in time, but I also kind of appreciate them for that reason alone.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you say you're kind of alluding to the corporate consolidation that we've seen in a lot of mainstream cinema in terms of, you know, a few limited companies working with a limited amount of IP that is being rehashed for these enormous big budget blockbusters that are, you know, sort of almost solely responsible for the profit margins of cinema at this point. But yet we also live in a time where we have a movie like Skinamarink where, you know, you have a YouTuber who makes horror movies on his YouTube channel and then takes a $15,000 budget, shoots it in his childhood home over, you know, a short amount of time, and is now making millions of dollars and has, you know, one of the sleeper hits. And especially through things like TikTok, like we're able to kind of discover and access, you know, very niche and independent media in a way that we never have before, at a time where what is dominant in cinema is more corporatized than it's probably been since the studio age, which you've covered on your channel. How do you feel about this? Like, how optimistic are you about the state of cinema?
Well, I think what you're saying, especially about Skinamarink, is interesting because, yeah, we're in this time where to get a film off the ground and actually made through a formal channel is becoming like almost impossible at this point. But because of the internet and because of social media and all these platforms like YouTube, there's been an extreme kind of democratization of visibility and also democratization of access to the skills of filmmaking. So it feels like if someone is able to take kind of those alternative channels and get a film made, then are we really actually in this crisis, or are just like the old kind of channels of cinema dying out and like we're kind of evolving into this new era? There was a film in Canada called Therapy Dogs. I can't stop talking about it. But it was this film made by a guy named Ethan Eng. He was a high schooler when he made it. He dropped out of high school to make this film. He self-funded it himself. It's one of the most amazing films I have ever seen, and he did it all from his own money as like a 17-year-old. And now it's premiering in the US. It's having a US wide premiere. It just premiered in Berlin. And he kind of, you know, he gave me a little bit of hope that there are ways that we can kind of circumvent this. You just have to be a bit creative about it. So I think it is kind of like these old channels are dying out. I think that the studios are producing this sort of monoculture, but because theaters themselves seem to be dying out, even these kind of multiplexes, not just independent theaters, it feels like maybe the democratization of cinema and like maybe the new form of cinema is emerging from social media and like the internet.
Well, it is really, I mean, the whole sort of like monoculture versus grassroots access thing is, I feel like it's something that we're seeing in almost every aspect of our culture, right? Like when you look at, you know, for example, the way brands use social media, you have these global behemoths with unlimited resources at their disposal, and yet they can't organically engage with an audience the way a teenager filming themselves eating fast food in their car manages to engage with people. And there's almost, I think, sort of the relationship that we have with authenticity as a result, I think, has become really, really fascinating, where we both demand complete authenticity, but we also demand a level of, you know, perfection and a level of professionalism from the content we consume. And it feels like we're in a very, very strange place in content creation more broadly outside of just cinema. I'm interested, to what extent do you think movies are kind of driving the way that we perceive these things and to what extent they're sort of downstream? Because obviously, just looking at social media, like the way we consume content has so radically changed in the past 20 years. And it's often hard to even understand how the actual institutional pop culture we consume has changed as a result.
I think that, yeah, because we're getting this influx of this kind of hyper polished, hyper commercialized style of filmmaking, like that, it's, you know, it's extremely risk averse. They've kind of calculated exactly what audiences want in the most digestible, palatable way. We're not getting that kind of unpolishedness that you would get from like an art house film or a grindhouse film or any sort of kind of independent cinema, where you can kind of see the flaws, or you can see the filmmaking and like the process in the actual product itself. But I do think that there are people who are really craving authenticity. Like I do think that that's something that hasn't died out. Like people do want that. I'm not really sure though. I don't really know what kind of the solution is or what we're looking for, but I do think that there is a demand for that. It's just that you have to kind of go out and seek it yourself almost, because it's not going to be given to you.
Well, I mean, another kind of even slightly more close to the heart of the matter than cinema is reality television, which is also something that you cover quite a bit on your channel. Shout out to her video about Love Island. I've seen all of like 3 hours of Love Island, and then like 30, like I watched 30% as much of her video about Love Island as I've ever seen of the show Love Island, because I watched her hour-long video, and that was totally worth it. It's an amazing video. But that video is about kind of surveillance and philosophy and authenticity. And I would love to hear your thoughts about just kind of the concept of authenticity and what the audience is expecting today, as opposed to, 15, 20 years ago, which was, as you point out in the video, kind of the dawn of reality television as we know it, but also in many ways the dawn of social media.
I think that audiences in their hearts want authenticity, but because what they're seeing isn't necessarily authentic. Like, I don't know if we know what is authentic and what isn't, especially with reality television. It's always been kind of like a corporate, like commercial enterprise. It's never been some sort of like grassroots thing. But it does feel like I say in my Love Island video, that with kind of the overproduction and the over kind of like that again, like risk averse nature of that these shows have kind of evolved into, we're seeing like a much less authentic version of what we're getting on TV. I think in terms of authenticity, like I just think there's a lack of messiness in the media that we're watching. Like I think that the reason that we kind of love reality television and the reason that we kind of started watching it was for the kind of like messy, like candid, uncensored moments. But the problem is, because it was so exploitative and because there were actual people involved getting hurt in that process of like messiness and like lack of censorship, we kind of had to detour. I'm not really sure what counts as authentic anymore, because I just feel like everything has become so hyper commercialized that it's difficult to know what someone is like trying to make authentic and what actually is authentic. Like we've kind of entered this like limbo realm where we're seeing films that have like the veneer of authenticity because they were like, we want this to look as authentic as possible, but we don't really know what that means anymore. Like I'm not even sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm, as much as I've only seen 3 hours of Love Island in my life, I have seen probably 3,000 hours of the Real Housewives franchise, which is, have you watched it?
Oh yes, I am currently in the middle of a binge session.
Oh my gosh, what are you watching? Where are you in it?
Watching season 11 of Beverly Hills.
Okay. Have you seen the early seasons of Beverly Hills?
I saw part of the first season, but not enough to really be able to like know exactly what the vibe was.
Okay, so you're an interesting case study, because I was going to say that I feel like this entire sort of Ouroboros of authenticity is, for me, most visible in the Real Housewives franchise, where if you watch the first seasons of all of the different franchises, you are seeing, it's not perfectly organic because these women are aware that they're being filmed. But similar to the Love Island sort of case study, they're pretty new at that. They don't really know what it means. They haven't edited themselves. Haven't sort of they don't know what's going to be resonant with the audience. They don't know how to kind of manage their own behavior. Also physically, they look maybe not completely natural, but they look pretty close to how they probably were aging naturally. And now when you see it, like the seasons that you're watching, it's almost like a dramatization of the show. It feels closer to a scripted series that is sort of imitating the highlights and what is most resonant about those early seasons. I would encourage you to go back and watch some of the early seasons because it really, I think more than anything else, demonstrates the extent to which I think it's almost algorithmic in nature. Like the things that worked initially because they were sincere and because people felt that sincerity are now just being recreated and recreated and recreated until they are meaningless.
Yeah, I think we're again going back to this concept of like late capitalism. We're in this era where everything is a signifier of the actual thing. So like again, even with Real Housewives, I have watched all of Salt Lake City, and there's a woman on it, for those of you who don't know, named Jen Shaw, who's currently undergoing this mass like criminal trial for whatever scheme she created. But in the first season of Salt Lake City, I was watching it with my friend who's watched a lot of Real Housewives, and she was like, Jen Shaw is performing a caricature of a real housewife. Like everything she's doing is kind of to signify that she is a housewife. She like rents this mansion. She can't actually like she's renting her home. She rents this clothing. She has this glam squad that follows her everywhere, but it feels like she's performing this idea of what a housewife should be. And even with Beverly Hills, I've watched season 6, which is, it's still a bit older than season 11. And it feels like now, because the women are hyper aware of people watching them, like they carry glam squads with them everywhere. So people who do their hair and makeup and like curate these like ridiculous outfits just to go to dinner or like to hang out in each other's homes. Whereas like in season 6, the women were kind of just wearing their own outfits, which sometimes was cool because they'd be wearing like couture from their own wardrobes. And it just doesn't feel like it's the same. And you can see even with their faces changing over time and becoming more and more constructed to look like, going back to one of the videos you made, like kind of this Instagram face, you can see them looking less authentic physically as well. And I think that's a great point.
Well, I think the face is as much algorithmically driven as as the content itself. Like Jen Shaw, I can't watch Salt Lake City because I find it too staged, honestly. Like I don't find it to be like they were students of the craft when they started that show. There was never a point at which it wasn't a completely sort of intentional act on their parts. At least I think. Also for context, Jen Shaw is indeed going to prison for 6 years. I believe 6 years. But yeah, she actually really did some bad stuff. She spearphished elderly people. We actually covered it in an episode of Too Good to Be True. But anyway, suffice to say, like, I have never enjoyed that for that reason. But The Face is like it's the same example where, like, when I look at like cinema and I think of like the marvelization of things, where even when you look at like the early the first movies from the Marvel universe, where you look at like, the first Captain America movie, like they're still on actual sets. Like there's still an element of actual filmmaking in it. It's not just this sort of CGI monstrosity. And to me, those changes, those tweaks, those like constant optimizations seem as much driven by, algorithmic performance and focus grouping and homogenization as the way all of these women's faces change year after year.
I think that's exactly what the case is. And I think it's because there's too much money involved for them to kind of want to do something that's going to challenge that, or like something that's going to threaten the amount of money they're making off of these shows. Like with Marvel, they're putting so much money into these movies, like their budgets are insane now. And so it's like, we can't afford for this movie to fail. Like this movie has to work, and for it to have to work, you kind of have to make it the most like middling, like unexperimental, uninnovative thing, because if you do that, like there's a risk to that. And same with these women. I feel like if one of them kind of acts out in a way that isn't, they think at least, in line with what people want from them, that's posing a risk to the show. And I think that there's been a lot of discussions about, I know that Kyle Richards, who's one of the housewives, who's been a housewife since the beginning, a lot of people have accused her of kind of assuming the identity of a woman who left the show earlier, Lisa Vanderpump, and kind of becoming like what she thinks people want her to be, which is like the kind of like straight man to the people around her, like the nucleus of the group. But you can see her kind of putting it on like it's not authentic to her, and people have been getting really angry about her presence on the show and what she's been doing, because that's not really what they want, but it's what, like, the producers or maybe her think that they want.
Oh, 1,000%. I mean, to me, the best example, at least on Beverly Hills, is Lisa Rinna, who's finally off the show. But like for 7 straight seasons, every year she was like, people want a villain. I'm going to be your villain. And did it very deliberately and very sort of almost like formulaically on the show year after year. And people hated it. And it wasn't a love to hate thing. It was just like, this is obnoxious. Like, we want villains who are sort of organically people, and I'm sure she is an organically person in her way, but it wasn't the way that she was kind of orchestrating it. However, you do kind of sense that, and again, I mean, if you look at social media, so I don't know, have you seen this controversy around this makeup TikToker Michaela?
I've heard on and off things, but I haven't seen it for myself. I've heard it kind of secondhand.
Okay. Well, my ancient ass is aware of this whole drama with this makeup YouTuber named, or TikToker, sorry, not even a YouTuber. This makeup TikToker named Michaela, who was caught in the act of using false eyelashes when giving a mascara review. And she has borne the brunt of TikTok's ire because of this deception, which, whatever. I mean, like, listen, I think the amount of undisclosed sponsored content that's floating around that, at least it was disclosed, I guess, is like a slightly better outcome. But interestingly, in the act of sort of canceling her, well, canceling, quote unquote, but like, dragging her, a lot of people discovered, so she's sort of famous on the platform for having this, in my opinion, quite grating Boston accent, like a very deep, like she literally sounds like, my dad's whole family's from Boston. He somehow doesn't really have as much of an accent, but all of his brothers, like, she sounds like someone smoking a cigarette outside of a Dunkin' Donuts. Like, she is like the most like mass hole accent. And a lot of people discovered that it's actually completely put on. Like, she started doing it and people liked it, and the algorithm was picking her up more the more she used it. So she went from sort of speaking not exactly like me, but like a fairly neutral mid-Atlantic, not newscaster but close kind of voice, to sounding like a parody of someone from The Departed. And that's sort of what she's become famous for. And now she's sort of given interviews talking about, this is just who I am, and I felt like I had to hide it, blah, 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 blah. But that's been debunked because there's like videos of her speaking naturally before. All of that is to say, I am endlessly fascinated at the extent to which now algorithms are able to create people, like to actually imbue personality traits and character traits that didn't even exist in the person before.
Well, again, it goes back to that kind of like, I guess what I was saying about like the veneer of authenticity, right? Like, she's in her kind of performing this like Boston accent, it's almost like she wants everyone to believe that she's like this kind of like true, like, I don't know, real true American, which is so interesting to me. So it's like, what were you gaining from putting that on? And I honestly don't know. There are people kind of in like my city, I'm from Toronto, and there's like this constant thing with kids, like people who grew up in the city, trying to kind of protect their identity and protect the fact that they grew up here. And so some people I know have started speaking in this kind of like stereotypical Toronto accent, which is typically spoken by Caribbean populations in Toronto. And like, it's kind of evolved over the years into this like kind of famous accent we call like a Scarborough accent. But a lot of like, these like white kids who grew up in like more affluent neighborhoods have started speaking that way. And like, even Drake, like someone who's from Toronto, has made his entire career off of his Toronto identity, but grew up in a really affluent neighborhood, has started speaking in this Scarborough accent, and kind of, he speaks sometimes in like patois and stuff. And it's like, but you didn't grow up in Scarborough. So it's kind of strange that you have that accent, but I think it's kind of because people are trying to protect, like preserve this idea of authenticity and like project it out to the public, even though like in their heart of hearts, they know they grew up in the city. So I'm not sure why.
Well, to your point, it's a signifier, right? Like
Yeah.
that accent like signifies that you're from a certain place more than just the fact that you are from that place.
Yeah, I think it's a signifier. And I think that it's dangerous when the signifier gets like more and more abstracted. Even in the case of like Beverly Hills, like I feel like we're getting more and more abstracted from what is actually going on, if that makes sense. And I think that it's kind of like distorting our conceptions of reality because everything is kind of a sign of something and not actually the thing itself. Sorry, that was so vague.
No, 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 no. The only person that I find it, I don't know, I like Chet Hanks makes me laugh though, because I just love the idea of being Tom Hanks's son from wherever I guess he grew up in like Beverly Hills or whatever, and he just speaks with like an exaggerated Jamaican accent. Are you familiar with Chet Hanks? Okay.
Oh, yes, yes.
I don't want to say I love him because I feel like that's problematic, but I just like, I'm so delighted by it because it's the strangest. Like, he's not signifying anything. He's not trying to seem authentic. He's just like, I just like a Jamaican accent, so I'm going to just talk in it all the time.
There's something so absurd about it that you have to kind of appreciate it because you're like, this guy doesn't care if we don't like his Jamaican accent or we think it's wrong and that he's doing this. Like, he actually doesn't care. And so because he doesn't care, there's something that you kind of have to laugh off about it, which is terrible. It's awful. But that's kind of the position he's created for himself in pop culture.
But in some ways, like, I almost kind of more vibe with a Nepo baby who's just deranged like that than like, I mean, Colin Hanks is like out here being a serious actor. And it's like, okay, we get it. You're Tom Hanks's son. Like, you're going to have an illustrious acting career. I'm actually very interested to hear your take on the Nepo baby discourse, given what you cover for, your channel.
Oh, I have like so many opinions about it. I feel like I do think we're in an era where, of course, there are more Nepo babies and more of them entering industries that weren't previously as hinged upon, like didn't previously hinge upon having as many Nepo babies. Like the modeling industry never really used to be a space where, the children of people who aren't probably couldn't model in their daily life were modeling. But when we kind of freak out about this kind of whatever overabundance of Nepo babies in the film industry, I can't help but laugh because that genuinely has been a thing since its inception. Like there have always been these kind of film dynasty families, and like even older actors were realizing are the children of someone. Like I didn't know Josh Brolin was the child of someone, and then I found out he was.
What?
Through the Nepo baby article. But it's like, so it has kind of been happening for generations and generations. Like again, it's a fake meritocracy in the film industry. It's not a meritocracy at all. But at the same time, like they annoy me, especially the ones who just like cannot acknowledge the fact. Like it's so weird because in any other realm of the world, you'd be thanking your parents for getting you to where you are today. But because this industry, they really want to keep up this image of like working hard and working from the bottom. These people just like completely disavow their parents and pretend that their parents didn't really work to get them to where they are today. Like you don't really see them thanking their parents in award speeches. And it's like, in any other sect of the world that would be happening. So I find it really strange.
I'd like to take a quick pause to thank today's sponsor, Advisorcom. The TFD community loves Advisorcom, so I'm incredibly thrilled to be partnering with them once again. As you know, one of my life's passions is making financial education accessible for everyone. It shouldn't matter where you come from, what level of education you have, or what your current financial circumstances are. I'd argue that the more precarious your current situation is, the more important it is to educate yourself financially, and that includes having a professional guide you along the way to help you make the best decisions and navigate our financial systems with confidence. Getting to work with a living, breathing financial advisor has historically been out of reach for those with less than $250,000 in the bank, despite the fact that many of life's meaningful financial moments happen way before hitting that financial milestone. Robo-advisors and apps have tried to fill the gap, and while they can be helpful depending on your situation, there really is no replacement for one-on-one guidance and connections. Advisor.com provides their clients with a top-notch advising team for a fixed, flat annual fee. If you want to improve your relationship with money and are feeling motivated to make positive changes, think of them as your financial accountability partner. Their team of advisors work for you, not commissions, and will help you to achieve your smart financial goals through planning, investing, tax strategizing, and more. As I mentioned earlier, the TFD community loves and trusts Advisor.com. Schedule a free consultation with Advisor.com today at Advisor.com and never make another financial decision alone. The one that just makes me laugh the most is Lily Rose Depp, because both of her parents, like Johnny Depp, I believe, came from working class background. Obviously Johnny Depp, not a good dude from all available information. But what is undeniable is that he didn't come from money, didn't come from connections. He grew up fairly poor, working class in Kentucky, I think. And her mom, Vanessa Paradis, was literally like, she was on French television, like on a little like child competition show at 3 years old, singing songs. Like, and I think her parents were both middle class, normal people, whatever. So they both built, and, for as famous as Johnny Depp is, like Vanessa Paradis in French culture is like probably one of the biggest cultural touchstones they've ever had for, her type of media. And she was really like cross-platform. She had massive hits as a singer and an actress and whatever, model, blah, blah, blah. So to have two parents who truly are, kind of coming from nothing, quote unquote, and making it on this like raw appeal and talent, and then to be their child, who, as many people have pointed out, is 5'2", walking the runway for Chanel. So let's start there. But also like can act in movies in English, also can't act in movies in French, like just absolutely mid at every possible level, and has the gall to be like, I really hate when people call me a Nepo baby, blah, 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 blah. Like there's something about it that almost feels like Greek tragic. Like you are truly King Midas, like you have everything and you're good at nothing, and the only thing you could possibly have is a level of self-awareness, and you can't even have that.
The craziest thing was when she compared it to people's parents being doctors and them pursuing the career of being a doctor. And it's like, babe, you didn't go to medical school to act in The King. Come on. Like you still have to go through a certain process to become a doctor, a really arduous process to get to that level of a career. So for her to say that, I do think that we are losing sight though in the discourse of like the spectrum of Nepo babies, because that article that came out placed all these people. I mean, it did actually, I think it ranked their levels of success, kind of like, I think it had like platinum tier and like gold tier for all these different Nepo babies, but it didn't actually place them on a spectrum of what Nepo really means. Because, for someone like Lily Rose Depp, it's like both her parents are enormous superstars. Like their names would be known, mostly Johnny Depp, but like would be known anywhere in the world. And someone like like Katie Holmes and Tom Cruise's daughter, like someone like that, it's like your parents are both A-list celebrities. You are like, there, of course, like there would be nothing going on behind the scenes to even get you to where you are. Like you're just naturally going to evolve into some sort of really successful career by way of your parents. But then they put people in like Timothée Chalamet or like these different people whose parents are slightly like, they have some family connections to get them like get a foot in the door in the industry, but it wouldn't necessarily mean that they're inevitably going to get a role. Like, in any industry, you are going to kind of use connections to get to where you are. I don't think it's a good thing, but I don't think placing people like that on the same spectrum as Lily Rose Depp was fair in the article. And then there were people like, they mentioned Phoebe Bridgers, who's, I think her dad was like a lighting technician or something like that on like sets. And it was like, what does that have to do with Phoebe Bridgers becoming massively successful and being super talented? So I think there is like a spectrum, but Lily Rose Depp is quite literally insufferable.
Well, I mean, I think my comfort in all of this, and it may be cold comfort to those listening, but I always think like they'll never know the satisfaction of knowing that they earned something through their merit and hard work. And, that's again, it feels borderline Greek tragic to me. Like that seems like a sad life, and I don't emulate it at all. That being said, though, what we, for some reason, leave out of the discourse is people like Cara Delevingne and her eyebrows, because that girl has been cast in that. I'm sorry, I don't know if you like her as an actress, but I truly think that she cannot act. Like, I guess she makes sense as a model, whatever, but like one of the most mediocre actresses I've ever seen, and is nonstop getting cast. And I don't think her parents are actors, but like her family is like 8 generations blue on Wikipedia because they're like some of the wealthiest people in England. And it's like, how have we narrowed down the scope of what nepotism means to include people whose parents were like a grip on the set of a movie in the 80s, and not include people whose parents are like literally land barons that own half of Scotland?
Yeah, for me, acting especially, because when I was a teenager, I really, really wanted to be an actor. Honestly, from being a child, from childhood to teenagehood, I really wanted to be an actor. And I went out to so many auditions and like I got some, but like I really struggled and I worked so hard, or I felt like I was working hard. I really tried to like really embrace the craft. And it was difficult for me not fitting kind of like this like a certain appearance of what like agents and casting directors wanted at the time. And it really has always bothered me. Like it hits a nerve when someone crosses over from a different industry into acting, like when a singer gets to do voice acting in like, I don't know, some sort of Disney movie and doesn't do a very good job. And it's like there's so many incredible voice actors. Like acting is the most difficult industry and people are starving and like struggling and working so hard to get like even a single job, and for these people to just kind of like jump in and like take the role away from someone who would do a better job and also who deserves it, just ooh, it boils my blood.
Yeah, and it's tough to say like who deserves it because that's also subjective. But I can tell you that Rose Depp doesn't deserve it, just on an objective level. Like that
On
chick
skill alone, like
on
just
skill alone.
skill itself, like someone who is talented is what I mean by deserving it, like someone who actually has the ability and isn't getting the role.
Oh, and I mean, listen, I don't want to like bring it back to myself, but like I've never been in the like acting space, but I've worked in media my whole career, and let me tell you, like half the people working at magazines and newspapers, like their parents are very wealthy, or they also work at that newspaper, or they own a newspaper. Like the level of, sort of ingrained, just like I think people on some level almost can't let themselves understand how ingrained this is and how normalized it is in so many industries, because if you did, I think you'd become like borderline black pilled.
Oh, totally. And a couple like, most of the jobs I got throughout like my early adulthood were through like a parent's friend, to who at least put my name on the list to be seen in the first place. Every job I've tried to like cold apply for, I've never gotten, genuinely. And it's like that is a really depressing awakening. So like even looking around me at like the friends I know whose parents are extremely well connected, and who, not necessarily friends, but people I know who have gotten these jobs at their parents' firm, and you're like, that's like, I'm happy for you, but it's also like, yeah, this is a pervasive issue. It's in every field, in every industry in the world.
What is something happening in media right now that you're excited about, that you feel like optimistic and good about?
Ooh, interesting. I have to give that a think for a second.
Well, obviously the dude's dog movie, which I want to see now.
Okay, yeah, Therapy Dogs did get me really excited. I do think that everyone should go watch it. I don't know if it's going to get a wide release. I'm actually not sure, but yeah, it's an amazing film. Oh, I have to think about that. Mainly because I've been so depressed about the state of the world that it's been hard for me to find, excitement about things. I mean, this is probably a really classic example, or like anyone would use it, but I honestly love A24. I've been really excited about, kind of the path that they're carving, and the fact that they've really, really focused on A24 and Neon, like both of these distributors and producers, kind of focusing on these mid to low budget films and like getting them out there to the world. I know that's kind of a lame answer, but it has really warmed my heart to see.
No, I think that's a great answer. And I often think to myself, like, there are, like, so I watch a lot of, I consume a lot of French media as well as, American media. And I feel like A24 is often the closest that we have. Like, France, like, has many problems as a culture. I am not a Francophile. Like, I'm not here to defend them on every point. but they churn out that quality mid-budget media like nobody's business, and it's so much more normalized to just like go to the theater every weekend, see like some little movie about like, you know, I don't know, like a teenage girl coming of age, or like a nun having an existential crisis, or like whatever. Like there's just this concept of cinema as sort of a more, I want to say, kind of populist thing, and the idea of it not being something that has to be very grandiose in scale. And I do think A24 is like one of the closest things that American media is getting right now to the sort of democratized, accessible, but yet quality cinema experience.
Yeah, I think France has done an incredible job. Say what we what we will about them, but they have done an incredible job of protecting their national film industry and preserving it and fostering like a really vibrant art community. And I think that film has this unfortunate kind of duality to it where it has always been profit driven. It is like a market. It is like very much rooted in financial success, but then it's also an art form. And that kind of is the case with every art, but I think filmmaking is kind of one of the most obvious examples of it. And so we're kind of seeing like the financial aspect of it eroding the art aspect of it. And like you see that these Marvel movies aren't really focusing as much on the concept of art. And so to see A24 really have an art driven mission in mind, and like allowing filmmakers to experiment with the medium and feel like they have a safety net and feel like they can kind of push the limits of what they can do is really amazing to see. And I know that there are other independent distributors and producers out there. This is just the biggest one that I can think of. And yeah, I think it's a great thing.
I think it's wonderful. They've produced some real bangers. Okay, so we have a little time left, so I want to get to, we have a lot of audience questions. I won't have time to get to them all, but I want to ask a few. Ooh, as a creator who deeply analyzes the film we consume, what are your guilty pleasure movies that are feel good or underappreciated?
Oh, I have so many.
Let's hear
I
it.
love Showgirls, and it's insane that that is a guilty pleasure movie, but genuinely, it's one of my favorite films. Like, it brings me so much joy. It's directed by Paul Verhoeven. It's genuinely a mess. It was like widely panned, but for some reason, it makes me so happy. I've seen it like 5 times. I just think I love a movie that is so unintentionally awful. I recently watched Vampire's Kiss with Nicolas Cage, which I am now going to list as one of my comfort movies because I'm hoping to watch it from now on as often as I can. It's also just so out there and ridiculous. Really hard to tell if it's a comedy or if it's trying to be serious, but his performance in it is just so over the top and it's just so enjoyable to watch. And then I always fall back on The Devil Wears Prada. And I actually think that people don't talk enough about The Devil Wears Prada as a really wonderful piece of filmmaking. Like, I don't think that we focus enough on the filmmaking elements when we talk about it, but I think it's like a genuinely incredibly well done film. It's one of the few like kind of fashion industry films out there, and it's such a nice watch. It's just really easy. It's breezy, but it's also a great film, and I have seen it potentially upwards of 40 times.
Same, but also I'm gonna have to call you out on your description of it as a guilty pleasure. That movie is cinema. That is cinema to me.
That's true. It's not a guilty pleasure. I'm trying to think of something else that I like that isn't good. I don't know. So many movies. Most of the movies I like aren't great. Princess Diaries, truly like any of the early Anne Hathaway movies. I'm a huge fan of.
One thing I have to shout out The Devil Wears Prada for, though, is how unbelievably good the clothes still look. Like, they all look like you could wear them today for the most part and would look fabulous.
I am still out here getting bangs and being like, it's Chanel or whatever she says in the movie.
Although my one pet peeve with that movie is there was like, especially a couple years ago, there was this weird discourse that was like, the boyfriend in that movie was actually terrible and he was like kind of like dragging her down, whatever. And I was like, guys, she was like being abused at the workplace and like had completely abandoned her personal life and relationship. And she didn't even want to work at this magazine. Like, if your partner was doing that, wouldn't you be like, this job is ruining your life and by extension mine? I don't know. Where do you land on that one?
Yeah, it's a little girl bossy to be like, ladies, focus on your career. If you miss your boyfriend's birthday, it's all part of the hustle, queen. Lean in, babe.
Like, she literally missed his birthday. Like, I would not be okay with that. Okay. As a woman in the film YouTube niche, such a famously hostile field, do you think the audience response is getting better or worse?
I actually think it's getting better. Um, at least for the niche that I'm in. When I first made a video back in 2018, the comments were quite literally, they were concerning to say the least. And it was a video about feminism. I probably should have known the audience that it would attract, especially back then. But I do find my earlier videos tended to have much more hostile comments. I think that on YouTube, once you grow a community, the majority of the people viewing your videos tend to be people who already subscribe to you. And so it tends to be a kind of like-minded audience, or at least an audience that knows what they're signing up for. And so the comments have gotten a lot nicer over time. I think that I'm really lucky because my subscribers are so intelligent. It's insane. And like the
We
debates they
are.
have in the comment section together, and like it's always so polite, um is just incredible. It's been really exciting to see. Like I feel like I'm learning a lot from the people who watch my videos. So I would say it's actually evolved into being nicer over time. That is, like, I don't really have a very parasocial audience, so I don't feel like there are a ton of expectations placed against me. I do think that maybe other YouTubers might not feel the same way in my niche, but I'm at a point where I don't think that I've teetered into people kind of overly scrutinizing the things I do.
I'm interested, actually, this is not an audience question, but it just occurred to me now and I want to ask it as someone who's in like the film space. Although I will say you do cover other types of media, you cover reality TV and stuff, but primarily film. Um, there's such a rise and popularity of like the ending explained or this movie explained kind of videos, which, I'll be honest, I've consumed from time to time. What are your thoughts on those types of videos?
Yeah, it's tough. I think that telling an audience what to think and giving them a single reading is not super helpful. I think it's fair for people to, like, not understand maybe a more esoteric movie. Like I'm sure a lot of people who watch like a Darren Aronofsky film are going to be like, what does that mean? But I don't think that someone kind of taking the definitive answer and giving them like a single reading is great. I try to tell people that, like, with my videos, I'm looking at it from a certain lens. Like people are always like, why didn't you touch this, or why didn't you talk about that? And it's like, I don't think that it's helpful to try to cover every basis of a film. I think that every video should try to be tackling maybe one to two lenses, because that's the only way you can really get like a deep analysis. But there is no one single reading of a film. Like again, it's art, it's subjective. People are going to come away with different understandings of it. And I think that that's fair. So I don't know. I think that these videos, I mean, they're kind of clickbaity, to be honest.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've watched like four of them about Skinamarink alone. Um, and I
Again,
feel
like I've watched them about, I watched one about the menu because I was like, I don't think this is as good as people think it is. And I watched a video on it and I was like, yeah, it's not as good as as people are saying it is.
I like am too stupid for Charlie Kaufman movies, and I watched several about what is that movie called?
I'm thinking of ending things.
I'm thinking of ending things. Have you seen that movie?
I haven't seen it, no.
Okay, well, it's like as with many Charlie Kaufman movies, a bit inscrutable, and I do feel also that like I and I think this is one of the, again, I think it's kind of algorithmically driven, is this approach to media that's very like it needs to be linear. It needs to be understandable through one narrative. And I actually found, like, because I watched that movie and I was like, I'm a little stupid for this. Like, I don't think I get it fully. And then I watched a few videos, like, explaining it. And I was like, oh, this is worse now, because I feel like I no longer just sort of like am sitting with the things that the movie made me feel. I'm now like on a detective game. And I enjoy that less, I think.
Yeah, I think of coming away with a feeling, and sometimes like a feeling you can't explain, is much more beautiful and cathartic than being like, and here are all the logical pathways that we arrived at this ending. I think that feeling takes priority.
I would totally agree. So, as a last question from our audience, oh, I like asking these questions, just kind of getting the inside baseball aspect of it. At what point did you decide to do YouTube full time, and what calculations of income and or pension planning was involved for you to make this step? If you feel comfortable answering with dollar amounts, please do, but no worries if not.
That's such a good question. So with YouTube, to become a YouTube creator, you have to have a certain amount of subscribers. I think it's changed, but at the time that I became a YouTube creator, I think it was 20,000 subscribers. And only then can you start monetizing your videos. So it took about 7 months to get to that kind of marker. This is in 2020 after my first video blew up. I made a few videos before that, but those were not monetized at all. But to actually start doing it full time, I think it was like a full year and a half, over a year and a half, when I started being able to have a stable enough income to do this. And it was when I started getting sponsorships, because YouTube ad revenue is very unstable and unpredictable. You never know when your video is going to get age restricted, which mine almost always do. not actually, but often. You never know when it's going to get copyrighted. And so you kind of need this safety net of a sponsorship to keep you afloat. And typically at the time I started, a typical sponsorship, there is no regulation, like there is no real industry standard. Like we're in a very new industry right now, but I would say it was about 2,000 to 2,500 per sponsorship around that time. But every YouTuber makes kind of a different amount based on like how many subscribers they have. It really depends on how many views you get per video. So you have to hit, like you give the sponsors kind of like a minimum view count that you're going to hit, and that's like a guarantee that you'll hit that in order to make the sponsorship money. But yeah, so I make one video a month. My sponsorship money is my primary form of income. Other YouTubers use Patreon, which is, I think, sometimes a little bit more of a stable form of income. It's like a monthly crowdfunded, platform. But yeah, mine tends to be sponsorships, and I'm in like an insanely lucky position. I'm really grateful to be able to do this full time.
You went from zero, like never having done a video before, to 20,000 subscribers in 7 months?
No. I made I think it was either 2 or 3 videos in 2018, or 2 videos in 2018, 1 in 2019, and those didn't do very well. I think they made like max like 1,000 views. But then in January 2020, I made a video about Parasite, and because Parasite was already popular, but then it won the Oscar like a month later, my video hit the algorithm, and I used like a really clickbaity title, to be fair, and it blew up, and I ended up getting like a pretty substantial amount of views. I think it hit 1 million pretty quickly, and so from there it kind of snowballed. But then I plateaued for a bit, and then in September of 2020, I made a video about Sofia Coppola, and that went viral as well. And so that was where my subscribers started like really snowballing. But between then, I had been making a monthly video every single month. So yeah, it was pretty fast. I think it was definitely a luck of the draw.
Was that the Politics of Pretty video?
Yeah.
Another banger, another absolute banger. Wow. Okay. Well, this has been delightful. Please go back and watch the old seasons of the Real Housewives franchises, because you're getting the garbage runoff. You need to get like the crown jewels of the franchises.
I'm watching for the Erica Jane controversy. That was why I started with this season, but I am definitely going to go back because I am so hooked now.
Good. You must go back. So obviously, I've been shouting out your videos quite a bit here, but for those who want to go and watch more of them themselves, where can they find them?
So you can find my videos at Broey Deschanel on YouTube. I also have a podcast recently, which I guess I'll plug here. It's called Rehash, and I'm co-hosting with my friend Hannah, and it's about social media phenomenons. And you can find it on all podcasting platforms.
Gonna have to add that one to the feed. I am very excited to listen. Well, thank you so much for joining, and thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next Monday on an all new episode of The Financial Confessions. Bye.